it's a great pleasure to be back here at ClueCon, right? And it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share a little bit of my experience with Flutter and WebRTC. This is something that I'm doing mostly to get a deep learning about this integration, Flutter and WebRTC. But since I know a lot of you guys goes way back, let me share a little bit of my story so you guys can judge my bias when I'm using tech, right? So for me, everything beginning with this computer here, an 8 bits green screen computer where I learned BASIC. So I really learned how to code very young. And since then, I simply love programming, right? For me, programming is most work and a hobby. So I have experience with a lot of languages, had good experience with almost all of those, right? But there is one specific moment that was not a very good moment in my career. I don't know if you guys remember when the App Store were launched, right? But at that time, I was basically a Java developer, right? And that exciting new marketplace for developers, and I don't have a clue how to create apps for that environment, right? At first, I thought, okay, maybe it's just a matter of a couple of months, Oracle will catch up, will create the virtual machine for iPhone, right? So naive of mine, right? I didn't knew much about Apple at the time, but when I started to learn about Apple, I saw, okay, I really need to learn how to code for iOS. I really need to make the suite for that platform. And that means I really need to empty my pockets, because when we are trying to build stuff for Apple, you really need to get the full stack. The full stack, right? Trading my phone, my notebook, everything new, including the operational system. But yeah, I did that, trade everything, start to learn how to create iOS apps. At the beginning, I was basically ignoring Android, right? I don't trust Java anymore. I don't want to use Java, so I was ignoring Android. I know that a lot of companies were also doing that, basically focus on iOS. So I did the same. But at the same time, we all watched that movie. We knew that at some point, Android will actually take over, right? This is the most recent data. So about the market share worldwide in terms of Android, iOS. So we know that Android, now it's really relevant. And back then, when I was learning, I was, okay, yeah, only iOS will not cut, so I need to find alternatives. As a web developer, I end up finding a lot of good alternatives. So I said, okay, that's it. I already know how to implement mobile apps, right? I know HTML, I know JavaScript, so I can do it. 2015, I launched my own startup in Brazil. Day one, we have the app on both stores and on the web. I use Python and Django for the backend, AngularJS for the front end in the web, and Ionic, which is basically the AngularJS for mobile, to create the applications. And whoa, nice, right? I finally got to the store. Actually, it was a nightmare. I had to remove the apps from store a couple months later, right? And what I learned from the experience was that it's not about the language. It's not because I knew HTML and knew JavaScript, I could make the mobile apps, right? And it's also not about the native look and feel that people think like, okay, you should create an iOS app that looks like an iOS app. You should create an Android app that looks... It's not about that. In the end, the real problem is, do you believe that mobile users dare to start your application without internet connectivity? For me, that was like, whoa, why they expect the app to work if they don't have internet? So a lot of complaints about that and a lot of tickets. And what's even worse, no matter how fast me and my team could actually fix all the bugs, there was always one user with the very first version. Always one user with the previous versions. Because we don't have the same control as when you're deploying to the web, right? It's not a centered server where you deploy once, everybody gets the same version, you are in control. When you are doing mobile applications, you definitely need to expect, like, okay, a wide range of devices, a wide range of your own applications in the back there. After my company, I also worked for a company here, United States. We started with an MVP using React Native. For that company specifically, that was a very good fit, especially because the core library in JavaScript. But same problem. We didn't have good mobile developers for React Native. So they created two teams, a team for iOS, a team for Android. My team, we called ourselves the core team because we keep maintaining this JavaScript common library between both. It was a proprietary technology that was written in JavaScript, and we could actually not port to those platforms. So we used the very basic support that we have on both platforms to run JavaScript and kept the core in JavaScript. Don't try this at home. Please don't try. Never try to share code with Android and iOS doing on your own, like basically just with this simple support. It doesn't work. It was a nightmare. So I continued trying to find alternatives, and then I actually find Flutter, right? And I know what you're probably thinking right now. Yet another language, yet another framework. So yeah, let's cover that real quick so we can start talking about WebRTC. So Flutter is a modern language that feels nostalgic because it's actually a combination of all other languages and the good features about all other languages, right? So let me highlight a few that I personally like a lot. It's typed, so it's a language that we have types, but yet at the same time, you can still have dynamic types, which means that you can design a server and client communication where your app won't crash if the server is in a different version, because you can exchange non-typed messages, right? And we have async APIs. We have streams as a type, so not just the promises we have in JavaScript. JavaScript, we can also have the concept of streams, right? But it's not like a type on the language. Here is a type on the language. But the most important characteristic of Dart, especially in this case of Flutter, is that it's a language that can be interpreted or compiled. So save this. We're going to talk more about that. And now, Flutter. Flutter is a framework built with Dart, right? And if there is one word that defines Flutter, it's productivity. It's really across all the board. Everything in Flutter was meant and designed to be productive. So we have hot reload and hot restart, which basically lets the developer create the UI and see live reactions of the application, just reacting to those changes without needing to recompile, restart. So that's very nice. We have a lot of dev tools to integrate with the IDE. Specifically, the way Flutter is designed to work, we do need to move code a lot, because when we are moving code, we're actually moving stuff on the screen. So we have a lot of nice features integrated with the IDE, so I can wrap my code, I can move my code, I can remove that, and not, because sometimes that spans more than one line, but it's just one component that you want to remove. So one of the most important characteristics, in my opinion, a very extent widget collection. Widgets in Flutter are basically the components that you use to build the application. So it's not just a framework where you were going to build all your stuff. So if we compare this with React, right? We have the React library in this case, but they don't provide the React components. We need to create all components on our own, right? Flutter, you have everything, including components to render like looking as an iOS application, and similar components to look like an Android application. But not only components for the screen, we have components for behavior, utilities, so it's really complete in that sense. The documentation is great. We have channels on YouTube. We have a lot of videos about it, and especially when we're working with tools for UI, videos are very helpful because you can see already what that specific component will look like. So great documentation. But what really strikes me about Flutter is like when you create your project, you have already everything automated. Your tests are already there for you to write, but then run it in an automated fashion, right? Building and deploy for any platform that you want to do, it's already automated. So you can build a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, very easily with Flutter. And how is that possible? How we can actually use Flutter to create applications that are not only, and I think that's the first time I'm mentioning, when I discovered Flutter, I also discovered that it's not only for iOS and Android. It actually can be deployed in the web, Linux, Windows, how it works. So the magic is here. The embedder, it's nothing but just a native application. So if you want to have a Flutter app on any platform, first you need to have an app that runs on that platform, right? And that application, a native application, will just call a library. Because in the end, all platforms offers the ability to have like C code compiled as libraries, and then you do the C bindings, and you can call those libraries. So it's really an iOS app that's down here. And it's just calling a C library. This C library that's compiled as native code on the platform, right, takes control of everything, including the screen. So the Flutter approach is different from React Native and others. So it really renders every pixel on the screen. And on top of this C++ engine, we have the Dart code and the Flutter framework that's written in Dart, but compiled to native libraries again. So in the end, what we get, it's really a native app with some libraries that are compiled and used natively in the end. So Flutter are native apps. In that way, React Native and Ionic, for example, are not good comparisons for Flutter. We need to compare Flutter with Unity or Qt, which are graphic libraries, multi-platform. You can use Qt to create mobile applications also, right? Just like Unity. So if you have to compare Flutter with other technologies, you should be comparing with these ones. So yeah, I found it, right? Flutter is the solution for every problem we have on computer science, right? No, it's not like that. Of course not. So I think if you want to choose Flutter, you need to be very mindful about that. And this is how I think. First, here we have the application UI. On the top, we're talking about custom experience, a design team creating different types of components, things like that. In the bottom, just stock UI, just what both, not both, let's talk about all platforms can offer. And here, simple hardware requirements, a screen, some sort of user input, right, and processing. On the other hand, we really have like specific hardware requirements. So if you are building this type of app, like I really need to comply with the OS UI, and I really have specific requirements, it's not that you can't use Flutter. You still can, but probably you're not getting too much out of it. On the other hand, if you are building a custom UI and you don't have a lot of specific hardware requirements, then you're really getting a lot of productivity out of the framework. But on all the 4 quadrants, it's possible to really create a Flutter app. So now let's start about WebRTC and run our own checklist and see if it's a fit and something we should consider. So when you're building a WebRTC app, probably we're going to need a player, and the player is something that it's stock. You won't really code the player. You are not going to create something to render the video. It's there already. You don't need to worry about that. But we're not talking about a recorded video. We're talking about a live call, live video. So you have to create your own controls. You have to handle live events from that video, like orientation that can shift, aspect ratio in terms of the user device, right? And a lot of other features. Because one thing also interesting about having a WebRTC application like this, it's the main content. You cannot really predict where is the main content, right? We are in a call. Sometimes we think that people will actually be like that in the very middle of the call, but maybe I'm trying to show something that's being handled here. And as a developer, I cannot predict that. So I need to come up with a lot of clever ways, like letting the user drag the overlay around, hide the menu. In other words, it's nothing stock here. You really need to be mindful about this UI, and if you can, you don't want to solve all these problems 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So yeah, custom UI, check it. Let's talk about the hardware, right? If it is a WebRTC application, it's not just simple hardware. We're talking about cameras, mic. But the good thing here, we're not talking about accessing those devices. We're not going to use those APIs. We're going to use the WebRTC API. So across all platforms, it's a single API, a single abstraction. So again, we have our productivity back. Check it. Multi-platform. Are we really building and creating these applications to deploy in more than one platform? That will depend on each application, right? If it's mobile, probably you have to handle Android and iOS. If it's desktop, maybe you can focus only on web, right? But in general, normally you were always thinking about Android, iOS, and web. And one nice thing about a soft phone application, a communication app like this, is if you have a single UI on all platforms that look like a phone, it works, right? So you probably can really build a single application and compile to all platforms and really get a good result of. So check. And finally, for me, a bonus point, right? Maybe you want to just have a desktop web app, and probably that's good enough and for most cases. But in some cases, big companies will want an install version of the app. They want to control who can install the specific version. Banks in Brazil love Flutter. They are all building apps with Flutter because of this. So my bank desktop app is a Flutter app that I have to install a specific version. They can check the fingerprint of that app because it's compiled. Right? So if you have those security requirements, we can meet with Flutter. Flutter WebRTC is a third-party package, so it's not built in to Flutter, but it's a very nice package, well-maintained. We see they got all the points on the pub dev. We have a lot of popularity on this package, but there is one thing, probably you guys cannot see this number, but it's the number of issues that looks a little bit fishy about this library. They have, last week, 500 issues open. Right, so, well, maybe it's not good enough for production. But actually, the main cause of those tickets are not really WebRTC. The main cause is signaling. So my experience with both Flutter and the WebRTC library was completely different because I was not trying to roll out my own signaling. I was always using the SignalWire protocols. I was always using a production-ready signaling. So in my case, I had only one issue with the library. And I was kind of already expecting that I will have issues when I try on Android, when I try on iOS. Apart from the security that each platform controls differently, once you have that set up, everything runs very smoothly. But I had one issue because I was using a deprecated WebRTC API that was deprecated on the web version. And it was working on the web app, it was working on the Android app, but it was not working on the iOS app. Then I created one ticket, and the very same day they replied, say, okay, the problem is the iOS, instead of deprecating this library, they stopped supporting it, so we cannot do anything about it. But just move for the new API and you're set. And that's what's happened with me. So, in my opinion, a Flutter WebRTC app, it's really here on the top, right? But again, I don't have any production experience with that. I'm still creating that app. I'm still exploring. But I have one friend in Brazil that has a real production app built in Flutter. They're a fintech. They were recently acquired by the Santander Bank. And this friend, it's all good words about Flutter, especially in production. Okay, how much time I have?
About 2 minutes,
Joao.
Joao.
2 minutes? That's why I already signed up for the dangerous demos, right? So I can actually do a full demo of all the devices. But let's see if I can get at least one call real quick here. Where's... Oh, I thought I had this running. Okay, so this, it's running on the browser. I just compiled the code as a web application. So I have the application running here. And right now it looks, especially because it's, wait, I'm the only one seeing this. What's happening? Let me mirror. Ah, okay, now it's good. So the look and feel right now, even in the browser, it's exactly what I get on the iOS and Android. I did nothing about changing layouts like that. And let me... And this is all running on top of SignalWire APIs using the call fabric abstraction that Tony was talking before. So actually with this app, I can call already SIP phones, I can call PSTN numbers. And yeah, it really works. We have all those UI features that I mentioned, and I really had to do it just once. So looking forward for the dangerous demo where I can actually show everything together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Joao.